What's your normal routine in the morning?
Well, I'm looking after my husband full time as a carer, so usually it's getting him ready first and then I get myself ready.
Because I know you've had a knee op recently, haven't you?
Yeah.
And
It's
obviously,
going well, going really well.
I mean, caring for somebody and you've got a knee op yourself, I mean, it just throws an extra thing into the
Yeah,
the
no, it
difficulties
does.
of life. So,
Yeah.
I mean, how do you handle things like that? The difficulties of life? Are you kind of used to it
I
now?
think
Or?
with the history that I've had, I think it's just made me resilient and strong, and I don't sweat the small stuff, you know? I keep it simple if I can.
So, yeah, because I think the small stuff is what majority of people sweat about as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I do the same thing.
Yeah.
But I suppose going back, looking back on your life, do you know that these things have had a positive effect on your life or a negative effect on your life?
I
Like
think it's a
sweating?
bit of both. It's taken a lot of years to peel the onion, as we say, and to unravel everything and to get the truth out there. And it's important to me that I do that. And I think it's part of me fighting back. I don't want to be a victim for the rest of my life. And it's about me having agency for myself.
Yeah, I suppose having a voice and actually speaking the words which are the truth,
Yes.
that's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And really important.
Well, of course it's
Yeah,
important because
really
I think,
important.
I mean, something like this could help somebody out there as well. And that is the whole purpose of doing this, is to have a voice for people who can reach other people in a similar situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the beginning, please, Danielle. So,
Okay.
where are you from? Where were you born?
Okay, so I was born in Zimbabwe when it was still Rhodesia in the 60s. And when I was about 3, I moved down to South Africa with my French father and my Rhodesian mother, and with my sister. And then my brother was born not long afterwards, not long after we moved in. My father was a photographer and an artist, and my mother was a journalist. Not long after we were in South Africa, when I was about 6 years old, my mother and father got involved in Scientology, having tried a few other things like Rosicrucianism, and my mother had been an Anglican, a staunch Anglican for most of her life up until that point. And in Scientology, they used to have what they call mission holders, who would they would have a little sort of franchise, if you like, in different towns where people would come and listen to the lectures of the founder of Scientology, who was L Ron Hubbard. And
So L Ron Hubbard was
the
there
founder of
himself.
Scientology. Pardon?
So he was there himself, kind of
He
giving these
wasn't,
talks.
well, he did come. He did come to South Africa, but they would listen to lectures on tapes. He did go to Johannesburg when I was there, but he wasn't, it's not a lecture I would have gone to as a 6-year-old kid or anything. But my mother would have listened to lectures in the mission on tape, reel-to-reel tapes.
So what was life like before they got into kind of the Scientology? Obviously they were religious, and is it one of those things where they're trying to find the group that kind of fits with their lifestyle? Is it something like that, or can you remember that kind of thing?
I would say, I mean, back in the day, it was, we're talking about the 60s. We're talking about quite a bohemian life. My parents were my mother was very liberal. They had lots and lots of friends and lots of eclectic mix of friends. So, my mother spoke French and she spoke Spanish. My father spoke many languages. They would meet with lots of different friends from all over the place. And so it was quite bohemian. People were seeking the meaning to life, I think. Some people might have tried drugs. Some people might have, gone to India to find themselves, this sort of thing. It was that sort of era when people were seeking the meaning to life,
Yeah, because you do what's kind of your social circles, don't you?
Yeah.
If your friends are in religion, you kind of find your kind of group and your clique, but whatever it feels right. So
Yeah.
I suppose people gravitate to certain different groups.
Yeah.
And were the 60s more of the experimental time for groups like that?
I think it was. And I think we're fortunate that my parents didn't go down the drug route. as many people did. But my mother was quite intellectual, and so they liked to socialise with a lot of people who were, you know, philosophers and teachers and journalists, and very interesting. I met some very, very interesting people, and my mother got involved in, you know, interviewing people as a journalist, and so sometimes people would come home for dinner who were really interesting and fun, and so it was a very laid-back lifestyle. Even once we joined Scientology, because we later had to join what they call their C organization, which is much more regimented, and you live together in a commune, etc., which I'll talk about later. But in this case, we were still, it was just fun and free, and people were lovely, and there weren't so many rules and regulations as they are today. And my mother just had a normal job during the week as a journalist, working for newspapers and magazines. My father was an artist and photographer, so he was always out taking pictures and out on sets and what have you. So, and I just went to normal schools. And we had a very happy life, really.
Yeah, I'm just trying to paint a picture here. It sounds like it's very outdoors. You've got,
Yeah.
you know, your backyard goes on forever, that kind of thing.
Well, it is sort of. I mean, we lived in a flat. We lived in lots of places. One of the houses that we lived in was rented from a lady who was in prison for having played a part in the Johannesburg railway bombings. And very sadly, I know a child died, and I think it was her grandmother possibly. And this was all about the anti-apartheid movement at the time. And my mother was very anti-apartheid. But we happened to live, this was a house that we happened to live in. This was a sort of, you know, there was a lot of tension that I wasn't aware of as a child growing up in South Africa.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't.
And
would
still
you? You're
free
a
and
child.
easy, yeah.
Of course,
It's,
it's not something any parent pushes on the children,
No.
but because you're in that family, things will rub off on you, and
Yeah.
it's kind of whatever your parents' lifestyle is,
Yeah.
kind of becomes what you do as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, you're living a life of freedom in Africa. There's lots of sunshine, lots of space. We just had a really carefree, loving time until we didn't.
But it's bizarre. It's kind of, I'm hearing, you know, your mum was a journalist and dad was a photographer. So they're very clued up and in tune to people. And the thing is, you recognize various different personalities, and you see so many very different people. And especially as a journalist, you've got to dig to find the truth about something, and you've got to kind of really look into something. So I'm really kind of wondering, obviously, was it because it's at the beginning of Scientology? Is that why they found the interest in that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm pretty sure if you speak to most Scientologists who were there in the beginning, it was a heady time. It was a time of lectures, a time of intellect, a time of debate. You know, you could speak your mind, you could agree, you could disagree without fear of any sort of retribution. You know, it was a really interesting time, and I think that's why probably so many people came from very interesting intellectual backgrounds. They were just seeking answers to life. You know, they were looking at the deep answers to life. Where am I? Who am I? Where do I come from? And for some reason, L Ron Hubbard spoke to them, and he spoke to that part of them that gave them answers, or the hope of answers, to the meaning of life and to what difference they could make to help make the planet a better place to live.
Yeah, because it's almost like there are certain religions around you, and if you don't fit with one of those, you're trying to seek another one. You're trying to find something that kind of fits with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Scientology just comes along, and then all of a sudden, everything starts with good intent.
Yeah.
I think everything is.
Yeah.
I mean, do I want to jump straight into the religion versus a cult?
No.
Because I don't know. There's a very fine line between the two. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I'm not convinced there's a fine line at all. I think there's a very definite line. You know, it's okay. It's one thing to worship God and to be given the freedom to be allowed to do that without fear of being abused and indoctrinated and brainwashed.
Because it's really it's a set of morals which you adhere to, which it's a kind of life map, isn't it? Really, so you you don't feel lost in trying to navigate it yourself.
Yeah.
This is a set of rules under this religion, and I like what these people do, so
Yeah.
let's follow that. I think
Yeah.
that's really how everything starts,
Yeah,
isn't it? Right?
and I think there's a line between morality and being allowed to have your own beliefs, whereas there's coercion and brainwashing that stops you thinking for yourself and tells you this is exactly what you should believe and this is how it actually is. And if you stray from that, you will be punished. Whereas in a loving religion, where there's freedom of speech, freedom of mind, freedom of thought, you're not afraid of that. And you have to be careful not to cross that border into the nasty side of it.
Yeah, because I think the lines get very blurred when additional rules start to set in.
Yeah.
And everything starts to become linear. And if
Yeah.
there's a punishment if you don't follow this, but you have to gain the trust of people by bringing them in, like what we mentioned before, with good intent. And then when you've gained their trust, then that's when you can manipulate people. Is that?
I really believe that. And I think one of the most crucial elements to all of this is love. And one thing that I think is hugely lacking in not just Scientology, but many cults is love, the concept of love. There is some go off on a tangent where they have this sort of sexual love, where the morality is out the window, and it's, you know, the leaders of these so-called religions that are cults, you know, abuse children and things like that. I think, you know, this whole concept of being loving and kind is lost. That I think a lot of people believe that they're doing the right thing. They think they want to, as in Scientology calls it, clear the planet. They want you to think exactly what LRH tells you to think and to abide by exactly what he tells you to do. And it's become so bad now that people are not thinking for themselves anymore.
I've really struggled to kind of understand where the common sense and that real gut instinct, and also the Scientology rules book, where you forget about your own kind of gut instinct and morality, and you just go, no, well, they say we have to do it this way, so let's forget anything I believe in from a human perspective, and let's follow these rules.
Yeah.
I don't understand why you don't go, hang on, this doesn't ring true to me.
Yeah, and the people who do get that, who do think like that, are the people who leave. But there are people who won't. They steadfastly, totally believe and are brainwashed into believing that this is the way to make this planet a better place to live, and that this is what we should do, no matter the consequences to oneself, no matter how much hardship you have to go through yourself. You have to follow the path, because ultimately mankind is who we have to save, and it doesn't matter what happens to you to get to that. And anything that does happen to you is your fault. What they call is pull it in. So anything that happens to you in a negative way or even in a positive way is you. It's all down to you.
Because personally, I have a real problem with preaching to other people about what your beliefs are, because that's what you believe, and that's fine and dandy. Why don't you just do your thing, but don't push it on other people?
No.
And I really have a problem with people who try and do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you see, the problem is that people are looking for answers, and they are looking for the meaning to life. They are looking for that place that nurtures them and makes them feel special, and where they feel validated, and that they are actually making a difference. And not only to the planet and mankind, but to themselves, and that, you know, they can be healed. So, you know, Scientology promises that they can heal. And so what happens is when you first begin, you start to feel quite good, because they have some courses that they do, and they do make you feel quite good. They have a communication course which teaches you good communication skills. But remember, a lot of what L Ron Hubbard did is not just his teachings. It's taken from a lot of other places which have been proven to work out in the world outside of Scientology. He is dead against psychology and psychiatry, and you're not allowed, if you're a Scientologist, you're not allowed to visit a psychologist or psychiatrist. there's a lot written if you read The Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller. You can see where this thinking comes from. You can see why L Ron Hubbard was against it, and it's, you know, John Atack wrote a book called A Touch of Blue Sky, I think it's called, and if you delve deep into the mindset of this man, who was a science fiction writer, prolific science fiction writer, you can see why he's against it. I mean, he bumped into the psychiatrist himself and had to have some therapy himself. And I would think, and I've gleaned, that some of his sort of hatred towards them is because of what he went through himself. But that's not fair to impose that on everybody else.
It's not, and also just because you've gone through something, it doesn't mean to say you have to do the same thing to other people.
Absolutely.
You can change, but again, it's everyone's circumstance is different. So let's start at the beginning of how your family got into Scientology, how you, the first days of being 6 years old, and now you find yourself, this is the way now.
Yeah, I think it's important to make the distinction between being a member of the public in Scientology and being what they call a Sea Org member, because that's the bit where the abuse happened, and the members of the public don't see what happens to the Sea Org members. There's this definite line. So I'm age 6 and I start what's called a communication course at their Johannesburg organisation. And what that meant was going in at weekends to do courses while my parents were also doing courses. There was things going on behind the scenes that I didn't know about, which I found out about later with my father, which I'll tell you about. But it was fun, you know. The cynic in me says that the reason that they put the children in to do the communication courses is because it was like being in a classroom and you had to sit still for ages. And it stopped the kids running around while the parents were trying. It was like a nanny service, really.
Yeah, like daycare, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd pretty much think that's probably what was going on, because it was fun. I think when you remember the public in Scientology, it's fun. I don't know that it's that harsh compared to. Well, it wasn't. I believe now they get involved in what's called the whole ethics subject in Scientology that causes huge issues. But back then, certainly, if you remember the public, and you were paying money, which is the big thing, you were lauded and applauded and looked after quite well. So until...
it's incentive, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, that's right. But the sort of Armageddon moment for our family was my father and mother split up when I was 9. And up until that point, we were quite happy and bumbling along and going to school and doing courses and what have you. And one of the reasons my parents broke up is it transpired that my father had been a plant in the Scientology organisation for the mental health organisation of Johannesburg or South Africa. And he was feeding information to them because at the time, L Ron Hubbard was considered quite a threat. And I think the mental health organisation were concerned, and so were the boss, who were the South African Secret Service, were keeping eyes on him. He'd been kicked out of Rhodesia. He wasn't allowed to. He'd gone over there and he had sort of visions of trying to take over the country and what have you. Well, of course, that wasn't going to happen, and he got kicked out of Rhodesia and other countries. You know, he was persona non grata in Britain after a while, and so it just. My mother still was a staunch Scientologist, and the fact that my father had been a spy in Scientology meant that my father had to then be called what they call a suppressive person. So he's kicked out of the organisation. He's not allowed to speak to my mother or us. You know, because we were connected with him, we were considered what they call potential trouble sources, so PTS. If you're connected to a suppressive person, you're supposed to be more susceptible to getting sick. And people staunchly believed this, you know.
Oh, so there's an actual, their belief is you're around people who don't believe what we believe, yes. Then you will get ill
100%,
from this?
100%.
Really?
100%. Yep. Yeah, and it's very divisive. And it also meant that you had to then disconnect from him. So you would have to literally be told that unless you disconnect from him, you're no longer welcome here. You have to disconnect. So if someone talks anything against Scientology, and you're a Scientologist, you're not allowed to have anything to do with that person if they're declared a suppressive person.
So they split up because of him being a spy.
Yeah.
How did they actually kind of get in touch with them via this? Because a guy who's a photographer, it's quite a, it's not as if he's working for the government and he's already half in there, Yeah. So how did that work?
Well, I'm young. I was so young. I don't actually know the ins and outs. I do know a few things gave me clues, which I think back on now. My father always had a dark room. Whatever house we lived in, he always had a dark room. And I went in, it was forbidden for us to go in, of course I went in. And I found a pistol once, a small little pistol, which isn't unusual for people in South Africa to have a gun. But there was just something about the size of it and the fact that my parents were actually against it, so it surprised me that there was a little pistol. There was also a very tiny miniature camera, a bit like a James Bond thing,
a spy camera?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Yeah.
So what were your thoughts when you found that?
Well, I was excited that it was tiny and it was interesting. At the time I had no idea that this was even going to be a thing in later life, that my father was a spy.
Yeah. It takes 10 years to figure out.
No, that's it, yeah. And then I remember going to places and he would take photographs of us kids, but there was something in the background that he was more interested in. So, that happened.
Yes,
so that was really...
Can you stand in front of the government building, please?
Just really weird. I just remember a couple... I remember once we went to Soweto, which is like an African township, which at the time was... a hive of activity in terms of underground stuff going on about apartheid. And my father had the three of us stand there was a sign about Soweto. I don't know if it was a road sign or something, but I know jolly well that there was something behind that he was more interested in when he was taking those photographs. I wish I had them. So yeah, there was a lot of that going on. I remember people coming to the house and money exchanging over the dining room table. And hushed voices and stuff. So,
but Mum wasn't there at the time, so
she was, but I don't know what her thought. I don't know. I wish I.
Yeah, because the thing is, if they have split up, but it's the power of Scientology to break up a relationship where you've had children and separate part ways. You would think you go, well, actually, I'm going to leave Scientology. I'm going to go with my husband. Forget
families in Scientology. It's people that matter to them, not whether you're a mother or a father or you have a child or a son or a daughter. When you're Scientology considers children to be adults in small bodies, and they're treated like that from age 11 onwards. And in some cases, some children were treated like that earlier.
Were you treated like that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned we're at age 9.
Yeah, so they've split up.
Split up.
Yeah, they've split up. And so my mother's thinking, well, what the hell am I going to do? Because, we didn't have a social services network like you have in England. We didn't have that support network. She really didn't have much money working as a journalist and having to support 3 children. My father was useless in terms of supporting his kids. He really didn't. And so he went off, and then we stayed with some friends. We sort of... they gave up their sitting room for us, and we lived with them for a couple of months. And then she decided to go up to Zimbabwe, which was still Rhodesia at the time. And she enrolled my sister and I in boarding school. How it was paid for, I have no idea. I don't know if it was a state boarding school or I just don't know. But my sister and I were in boarding school, and my sister was 6 years old, very young to go to boarding school. And I think I was 8. Possibly 9. And she kept my younger brother with her. She then couldn't find work to pay enough in Zimbabwe, so she left us in the school, took my brother with her, and she went down south to South Africa to work, I think just as a secretary for a guy who was the general manager of Legal and General in Johannesburg, who turned out to be a Scientologist. She ended up marrying him. But before this, a year after we were in boarding school, he turned up with my mother in what we call a bakkie, which is like an open-top truck, and with some new sleeping bags. And my mum said, "This is your new father. We hadn't met him before. He's going to be your new dad, and we're going to go and live with him on his farm with his kids." So we hopped into the sleeping bags in the back of the truck and we drove overnight from Rhodesia down to South Africa, and went to his farm, which I want to say it's about 30 miles outside Johannesburg, going south. And we arrived overnight to be greeted by an Afrikaans man with a shotgun who had been renting the farmhouse and had been evicted and was refusing to leave. So my first introduction to the farm was this guy with a shotgun. I was just like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
So we camped out in a big barn. We put curtains up for walls and we just camped. And actually, as a kid, you know, it's a bit of an adventure. You're camping out on a farm, and it wasn't cold, and initially it wasn't. Anyway, it took ages to get rid of this guy, and he wasn't far from us, so we were always a little bit nervous about that bloody gun. Anyway,
So how old were you at this time as well?
9.
9, okay.
Yeah. And my stepfather had 3 sons, one of whom I got on well with. The other 2 were abusive. And they sexually abused me and my sister and my brother. And my mother was absent, really. She was going in to work every day with him. And also, I think she was completely, probably in shock, because she met up with him quite soon after my father. And she'd been with my dad for 13 years. So I think she had PTSD, I'm sure of it.
Yeah, a bit of a rebound relationship, isn't it?
100%.
Really? So,
And he was a narcissist, and he was awful. You know, they were constantly teasing us, taking the mick. We were terrified of them. My brothers would physically jump on top. The stepbrothers would jump on top of me and my sister, and you know, start abusing us. And it was horrendous. And we went to a normal school. We'd catch the bus every day to school, and then one of the workers on the farm would bring the truck to the school, and then he would pick us up. We'd sit in the back of the truck, come back home after school each day, and then the boys would take over the driving once we got onto the farm. And the farm was big; there was a lot of land, and they would hoon all around, doing all of these wheelies, and we were terrified. So they just thought it was hilarious. Everything that happened,
terrorized.
Yeah, no, it was. And the sad thing, in a way, my stepfather was very wealthy, so we had materially everything that we could wish for. We had a trampoline, we had a swimming pool, big farm, pets, animals, lots of beautiful places to walk, a lake, a really nice house to live in. But it was one of the worst years of our lives. It was just horrendous, you know. So, because I mean, they did get married.
And this was from the start. It's like straight in. You 2 sisters coming into this new house, and then this abuse starts straight away.
Yeah.
And your mum, any?
She didn't do it. To be honest, I think she was a victim too. I think she was being completely under his thumb, and my mother was a very sweet, soft, gentle soul, and very loving to us, but was very easily manipulated and very gullible. And he took complete advantage of that, and so did the boys, who were real narcissists themselves. Just the 2 boys. The younger one was okay, and they had a daughter who lived with her mother and was very precious and spoiled, but she didn't have much to do with us. She lived with her mother. But yeah, so our lives were a misery living there. So wherever we could, my sister and I would go and hide or take ourselves off after school. You know, I used to love reading, and I'd come home from school and lie down on my bed and read, and then there'd be an army ant's nest in my bed, which they put in my bed. If we went swimming, they put catfish in the pool, which scared us. I remember swimming underneath. I'd swim lengths underwater, and one of the stepbrothers, who was particularly evil, was on a lilo and wouldn't let me come up for breaths. Every time I tried to come up, he'd come over me with the lilo. That scared me too. we hated it, and we were miserable, you know. It was a really unhappy time, really unhappy. My father was nowhere to be seen, and my mother's family, nobody came to rescue us. We just wanted to be rescued, you know.
Yeah, because I mean, who do you go to? You know, I mean,
No, there's nowhere to go.
yeah, I mean, not even teachers. I mean, you know, you probably were 10 at this age. Yeah.
No, and also you're talking about South Africa. One of the schools we went to was a Seventh-day Adventist school. Not because we were Seventh-day Adventists, but it was incredibly strict, very, very strict. And lots of canings for the boys if they just stepped out, not the girls, but if they stepped out of line. You know, this is a school where they inspect your nails, they inspect your shoes, your hair's got to be tied back, uniform's got to be pristine, otherwise you get punished. You have to go to church every morning before school lessons. So you wouldn't dare approach a teacher and say you're being abused. And even if you had, would they believe you?
Yeah,
That, you
because
know,
you think you're going to get punished there. So
Yeah.
you're living in a state of fear everywhere.
yeah. And the last thing you'd want to, not that I ever thought that, is I can only imagine you wouldn't want to leave your mother, you know.
Yeah, because your dad's left, and all you have
Yeah,
is mum.
and my
isn't it?
mother
So-
had to go to work, so it's like she was absent, and so we didn't. The people, we had a nanny, an African nanny, looking after us, and my sister was bitten by a snake one day on her leg, and this nanny she sucked the poison out with her mouth and spat out, and then put some kind of poultice on it, but it was never treated, and my sister was never taken to hospital, which is just like, it just beggars belief, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unreal. It's unreal. So it was a really difficult time. Yeah, horrendous. Teased incessantly. My sister and I would have a bath, and one day my stepbrothers had brought some school friends home, and we looked up and they were drilling a hole in the ceiling so they could watch us bathing. So
And you can't do anything about it.
no, nothing. And then, you know, if I went up to see the horses, I had to make sure that my stepbrothers weren't there, because one of them had pinned me up against the wall and started abusing me against the wall in the stables. So, you know, yeah, not great. It was a horrible, horrible time. Yeah. Anyway, they definitely didn't want us there, and the marriage didn't last long. But sadly, my mother was 6 months pregnant when one night we were sitting around the dining room table, and my stepbrothers were sitting on one side giggling and sniggering, and their dad took my mother by the hand and walked out into the front of the farmyard and said, and got into my mother's car. There was a Beetle that my mother had, and sitting in the back of my mother's car was one of her best friends, and he got into the car next to this lady in the back, took her hand and said to my mother, "We're getting married, what are you going to do?" And so he'd been having an affair with my mother's best friend, and she was 6 months pregnant. So again, this is more PTSD, more shock. I can only imagine the effect it had on my brother that was in the womb, you know, at the time. Obviously, my mother wasn't going to let him have the baby, but he was very smart and paid for a one-way ticket for us to come to England, because my mother said, "Well, what are we going to do?" She spoke to me and my brother and my sister and said, "Would you like to go and join the Sea Organization of Scientology in England?" And I think, you know, initially that's because, yes, she believed implicitly in what L Ron Hubbards said and Scientology, and she liked their mores and everything. But also it offered her a way out in terms of security and a roof over our heads and food in our bellies and stuff like that.
Anybody would take that.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Yeah. And of course, he paid for a one-way ticket to England, you know, very smart. But she did eventually get some money from him. It took a while, but she spent all of that on Scientology. And she could quite easily, with the amount of money she got from him, she could have bought us a house and we could have lived quite a nice life down in West Sussex in East Grinstead, where the headquarters are. So that was disappointing, to say the least. But at the time, yeah, we didn't know this. We found this out later.
So life after this family, so you kind of get whisked off to
So we arrive
the
in
UK.
England.
Yeah. What age were you now as well?
So I was 11. Would have been
Okay.
12 the year that we arrived. So I arrived in England in July 73, and we were picked up from the airport. The M25 wasn't built then, so I think we came through Streatham or something to get home. So we turned up. A guy called Bruce picked us up from the airport, drove us to what was this massive, to my mind, because we lived in a flat in South Africa, and you turn up into this manor house, very old house. I don't know if it's Elizabethan. Then it's not quite Elizabethan. I don't know when it was built. It might even been built in the 1800s. I don't know, but it looked very old to me, and it was a really big manor house. I don't know how many people lived there. I want to say maybe 200. I'm not sure how many. Maybe 150. And we were put into one room that had been converted into 2 rooms, and we just laid on mattresses on the floor until
like a Scientology house, really.
It's a
Isn't it? Is that right?
commune.
Yeah,
This is
commune.
where.
Okay.
Yeah, so they had, at the time, they had that one, and they had one other one, which was called the Stables, which is based at Saint Hill headquarters itself in East Grinstead. So we arrived and thought, I mean, you know, I don't know how I felt at the time. Maybe it was exciting. I don't know. It was all different. We were away from our abusers.
Well, it has to be better than that at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, so maybe it was fun. Maybe it was exciting. I can't remember.
Yeah. So you're probably thinking, oh, great. Yeah, at least we're rid of that problem.
Exactly. And my mother was happy. She became the editor of what they call the Auditor magazine, because she'd been a journalist, so she became the editor of the magazine, and she really enjoyed that job and met some really interesting people again, interviewing interesting people, writing about interesting people. And yeah, so I think she enjoyed that job, and she seemed fine. But had the baby. So in those days you could fly when you were 6 months pregnant. So she had my brother, who was born in the September. And we went to school. So we were enrolled in the local school in East Grinstead, just a normal state school. And then in sort of mid-September that year, I was asked to go to join L Ron Hubbard on his flagship Apollo, which was based in the Mediterranean. He was persona non grata in so many places and wanted by the American authorities and what have you, who were concerned about what he was up to, that he decided the best place to be would be a ship, because he could be at sea and under no one's jurisdiction, you know. And he had a little cadet army called the Commodore's Messenger Org, who these Commodore's messengers would look after his every need in terms of running messages for him verbatim. So he would give them an order for someone, they would take it verbatim in their head, then they'd run down, they would deliver that message, and they'd get a message back and have to run back up to him. They wore uniforms.
So like a cadet uniform.
Yeah.
What colour was this uniform?
So, well, it varied from at different times. There's a picture, Janice Gillam Grady, who was one of the Commodore's messengers. She's written 2 books, and there's a picture of her on the front wearing one of the uniforms, which it looked like just a blue shirt and some navy trousers. But if they were wearing sort of posh uniforms, they went through all different kinds. White uniforms, lanyards, the cap, the whole naval kind of thing, you know. And he called himself a Commodore. He wasn't a Commodore, but he called himself a Commodore. Again, Russell Miller's book, The Barefaced Messiah, if you read about L Ron Hubbard's lies, and the Scientologists believe what they told about L Ron Hubbard. They are told he was a war hero. He wasn't a war hero. But they won't hear it. So anything from someone like me, who would be a declared suppressive person, will not be heard by the people who are in, because there's this delineation, there's this line that you don't cross. So anything a suppressive is clever. It's so divisive. So anything a suppressive person says is not going to be believed at all by somebody in. So they're not going to believe the truth. They're never going to hear the truth. They're not even allowed to. When I left eventually, which I'll come to later, they had stopped newspapers. We weren't allowed to watch TV. We weren't even allowed to play music in our workspaces anymore, whereas when I was there, we were. Yeah. At one point, we were even suggested who we should vote for when the votes come for Parliament.
Yeah, this is where it veers off the intent, isn't it?
So awful.
So were you 12 years old? What age were you?
So I'm still 11, and I had my birthday when I arrived on the ship. Okay. So I arrived.
What were your thoughts at this time? Can you remember?
I believed, I think, that what I'd been led to believe and told and coerced to believe, that this was one of the most important jobs that you can do, to be a Commodore's messenger.
Yeah.
It's the creme de la creme. You're going to work for the founder of L Ron Hubbard, you know, the founder of
Feel
Scientology, L Ron
special.
Hubbard.
Yeah. It's
Really
great.
special, really important. So day one, I left, waved goodbye. It was getting chilly. It was September, and I remember getting on the coach at Stonelands, which was the manor house that we lived in. I can show you pictures later of the place. And got on the coach, waving goodbye, desperately unhappy to wave goodbye to my family. Really unhappy about that. My mother didn't even come with me. And she had my new little born brother, you know, who's only a few weeks old. And I'd really bonded with this little baby, and I was unhappy to leave, you know, and I didn't really know how to fight back. I did feel this pressure on me that I had to do this. And later, my mother told me that I begged her to go. Now, I don't know if that's true. If it is true, it's only because I would have been coerced enough to believe that you have to do this. I was escorted to the airport by somebody, a lady, I can't remember who it was. And to console me, she bought me a huge box of Maltesers. And I ate the whole lot, got on the plane, took off, and was promptly sick. So I was on my own on the plane. And this would have been my first foray into the wide world by myself, learning to be an adult at age 11. And I arrived at Lisbon Airport. Now, the other thing to know is that it was not all right for anybody else in Scientology to know where L Ron Hubbard was based, apart from those that needed to know. So my mother didn't know where I was flying to. No, she would not have known where I was going geographically.
So no contact
No,
after this?
well, once we were on the ship, you could write letters to your parents, but they were redacted. So if there's any mention, everything you write is read.
Yeah, it's like prison service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's got to be no mention of L Ron Hubbard. So I arrived in Lisbon, and I can only imagine, I can't remember, but I must have had a piece of paper that had a phone number on it to call somebody to say I've arrived. Because I remember waiting at the airport in a side room somewhere. So I must have been, you know, in those days, the what they called the air hostesses at the time would take you, look after you, wouldn't they, when you were a minor flying?
Yeah.
So I can only imagine that they took me into this area, because I remember a side area that wasn't the main airport. And this guy came along and said, you know, he was the courier, and he was going to take me to the ship. So I was driven to the ship, and then I remember arriving on the docks, looking up at this enormous ship. To me, it was, I think she's 360 feet or something, twin screw motor yacht, and used to be an old cattle ship back in the day. And I know L Ron Hubbard was up on the deck looking down, and he had two Commodore's messengers either side of him in their uniform, and I was kind of in awe. It's like,
it's
you
like
know,
seeing the man himself.
yeah, and
isn't
he's
it,
a big man. He was a big man, really big, and to me as well as an 11-year-old.
So what was he wearing? Was he wearing the uniform?
Yes, he was, and he had his cap on, and I think he wore a like a cravat or round here.
Yeah.
And I was escorted up the gangplank and then into the aft well deck, and then down some stairs in what became the aft lounge, it's called, where some of the staff would eat. The plebs, I call them. The officers had an officers' mess up on B deck. And so then down again into the bowels of the ship, into a dormitory. And if I was to tell you that it was dark, and the clothes, like when we were sailing, would be they would hang like this and do this, you know, and we were like 2 or 3 tiered bunks. And I was told this would be my bunk by a sink. And one of the Commodore's messengers in training was above me. And I just lay on that bunk and thought, what am I doing? Why am I here? And there I was in my flip-flops and my pigtails and my little South African knees, you know, just looking and thinking, what the hell have I come to? And I just burst into tears and just lay sobbing on my bunk. Now, by this stage, they had my passport and everything. I think they take your passports on ships anyway, but I've now come to learn in Scientology they take your passports. It's a nice way of stopping you leaving, you
Well,
know.
it's a form of control, isn't
Yeah,
it?
of course.
Yeah.
But on the ship, you have to, I believe all ships, you have to take people's passports, because if customs come on board, they have to show all the passports.
Yeah. So was it a sense of, I'm going to miss home, this is not for me?
Yeah.
You're being taken out of your whole
Yeah.
world, which you're comfortable with,
Yes.
just, and
Yeah.
then, yeah.
I felt abandoned, completely
Yeah.
abandoned, and I felt I had nowhere to turn. They do assign you what they call a buddy or a miner's mate, but I very rarely saw her, because she always had to be on what they call on post, on her job, doing her work. And she was no use to me at all, none. So I had no adult support. I had nobody to turn to at all. And I was lying sobbing on my bunk, and this lovely lady called Liz came to see me, and she said, well, you have to pull yourself together, and you've got to go and do some physical work. And when you first start in Scientology, in the Sea Org, that you start on doing physical work to learn the basics of the Sea organization, how to clean and how to, you know, who's who and where you're going, and or you do an orientation and all this sort of stuff. And I was put to doing painting. I'd never painted in my life, painting a cabin. So I was painting this cabin. And next to the cabin was what they call the snipes mess. And then snipes are the engineers who work in the basement of the ship. And they were great. They were like real life people to me. They weren't interested in Scientology really, in terms of doing courses and having what they call their auditing, which I can talk about later. But they were just salt of the earth, you know, real grafters and likes a joke and, you know, smelly oils and, you know what I mean? Just like...
But were these in Scientology as well, or were these
Yeah,
just like
some of them
freelance
were.
hired on to
Some of
kind of
them were,
maintain?
but some of them were, but a couple were just engineers.
Okay.
And then they came, they would eat separately to everybody. So I became the snipe steward, and I really enjoyed that. It was good fun. It was nice.
Human interaction
Human, yeah.
with normal people.
Yeah, and they were nice to me, you know, they were kind to me, and it was fun. Anyway, that had to come to an end. Excuse me, just have a sip of water. Yeah, so that had to come to an end eventually. And they put me to work in what they call the galley, which is, you know, where they do all the cooking and the cleaning and everything. And I was miserable then. I just wanted to go home. And so I vowed that I would be as naughty as I possibly could to try and get offloaded back to my mother. It took a long time, and I was naughty. I'd do like the ethics officers in charge of, you know, behavior on the ship and bad behavior and good behavior, whatever. Everyone writes knowledge reports on each other in Scientology, and there was a huge backlog of knowledge reports up to my waist. And I was asked to file all of these in the files, and I could not be asked. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to shred them all. So I shredded them all.
No.
Yeah. And I got into big trouble, because at this stage, someone called Ken Urquhart had developed something called the Rehabilitation Project Force in Scientology, and approved by L Ron Hubbards. And we had to wear black boiler suits and black armbands, and we weren't allowed to talk to the crew. And we had to do physical work all day, and then we had to study at night. We could only eat after the crew had eaten, if there was food left. Ken said there was food left. I thought, Ken, walk in my shoes, because if there was no food left, we didn't eat. And that happened. That really did happen. So doing this physical work, and I did things like I stole soap. I had no money. I had no money. I wasn't being paid for it. I wasn't doing a job. You're lucky if you get paid anything anyway. I stole tampons, you know, anything to survive. I'd left my glasses back in England, couldn't see properly. I was doing all this sort of physical work. Anyway, I still didn't want to stay. They wanted me to conform and be what I wanted, what they wanted me to be, and I really didn't want to do it. I wanted to go.
So none of this put them off. They kind of still kept you in because They thought they could
They
teach
thought
you.
they could reform me,
Yeah,
you know.
reform
So
you,
here we go. They developed the Rehabilitation Projects Force, Rehabilitations Project Force, so the RPF's RPF.
And did you go through that?
I went through that.
And what
And that's
involved?
even
What's
worse
involved?
and worse.
Yeah.
So they would have me go down into the bilges of the engine room with a billy can to empty the bilge tank out with a billy can, even though there was a pump. And you'd be covered, you'd be just like in a boiler suit. I had to scrub decks, you know,
Yeah,
just physically, you had to run everywhere from A to B.
yeah, punishment activities, isn't it?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
just punish, just damp you down. Anyway, I got to such a point, I remember sitting on the tarpaulin on the forward well deck one night, because when you're at sea, it's quite magical. You know, you can see all the stars, and my saving grace for me, and I love them today, are dolphins, because I would stand on the prow of the ship when I'd be scrubbing the deck or something, and dolphins would come, you know? And it just gave me the hope that there was something outside of this bubble that I was living in. Because some people would have felt suicidal, you know? Some people would have gone, some people did, they went mad. But I had an inner resilience somehow that I had to get back to my family, you know? There was this inner core of strength in me. Because you could have pinched me that night and I wouldn't have felt it. You could have thrown me overboard and I would have just sunk. But there was something, and the dolphins gave me that sense of freedom.
Yeah. Well,
you know?
You've already been through quite a bit at this stage, which would be normally the worst thing that's ever happened to anybody, and then you're thrown into this world, being on the boat,
Thrown in it again.
and you're in again.
Yeah.
So
This night was a kind of crunch time for me, and I just said I want to leave. And anyway, L Ron Hubbard, I think, despaired about what he could do with me, and he had me locked up in the chain locker of the ship for 3 days and 3 nights. So by this stage, I was 12.
And what's the chain locker?
The chain locker is where the anchor chain is kept in the forward part of the ship. And, you know, the big shackles, they're made of, I guess, iron, and they stink. You know, they like that rusty,
Metal.
wet smell.
Yeah.
And I found out recently, I found out in September, I was flying back from Paris to London, and I was sitting next to somebody who was an engineer on ships. And he said, do you know that even today, someone will go down into the chain locker of the bows of a ship and they won't come out again, they'll die. And someone goes in after them to find out where they are, and they too die, because apparently the iron, there's some kind of something goes on, chemical reaction or something goes on with the iron and oxygen.
Right.
And the oxygen is sapped out and they suffocate.
Really?
And this is where I was put with this kid. So I can only think there must have been leaks in there and too much oxygen because I survived.
Yeah, something got you through it.
Yeah, I know. So I was put in there with this girl, Lisa, from America, and she was going nutty. She could not shut up. She was singing a song, coffee, tea or me, she'd say all day. Coffee, tea or me. And it drove me insane. But she was she'd gone nuts. And
how old was she then?
Same sort of age as me.
Age as well,
yeah, African-American girl. I never knew what happened to her. And there was, before I was locked up in the chain locker of the ship, there was a young boy called Derek who'd been locked up by L Ron Hubbards in the ships. He was 3 years old.
Really?
Yeah, and then there was another guy in the lounge where I'd first come in, where we used to eat. In the back of that is the twin screw motor room, where the twin screws are going round. And there's like platforms on the edge of it. And I think a net. If you were to fall in, you're meat, you're toast. And this boy, he'd been really naughty. I mean, they had no idea what to do with him. And he was screaming. They'd locked him up in there and he was lying on the side.
Well, he's 3, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A young boy.
Yeah.
It was horrendous. Horrendous. And so 3 days and 3 nights I was locked up in this chain locker. They fed me my food through the hatch. They'd take me up to the toilet and that was it. That's all. And there was one guy who had gone mad. He was having a mental breakdown, and I could hear it all. They brought him upstairs to one of the cabins that was up on the left-hand side. I heard him ripping the mattress with his teeth, and he pulled the wooden paneling off the walls. And they have under what they call him type 3 when he has this breakdown. because they think they can cure these people and help them. And he's under what they call baby watch. They had people on watch, on guard outside. I remember hearing all of that going on. And for years, it took me a long time to realize what an emotional impact all of this shit was having on me.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize, you know.
You're just getting through it at the time, aren't you?
Yeah.
So 3 days in there.
Yeah, just.
So at what point?
So I'm then taken out of there
Yeah,
after 3 days.
Because you really want to leave, but they're not going to let you leave. But there's got to be some kind of pinnacle
I'm
moment,
fighting to leave.
Yeah.
I want to go. I think the dolphins, I keep saying it, but they gave me hope that there's life outside of this bubble.
Yeah, feel like you can escape,
Yeah.
you can't get off.
Yeah. And so next door to not far from the anchor room is a laundry room. So he had me locked up in there. I don't know how long I was in there for, maybe a couple of days. And then finally, someone flew me back as an escort back to England. And I found him recently. I found this man. Yeah, he's a lovely man. He's not in Scientology anymore. And I found him online. He said it was him, and he remembered me. And it was just, yeah, he's a lovely guy. So I was then escorted back to England, and because of all the shit I'd been through on the ship, I didn't care what happened to me in England.
Yeah,
and in the meantime, while I'd been on the ship, they'd gone through the winter of discontent. So they'd gone through that, is it 1973, 74, when there was the oil crisis, and they hadn't had lights and sort of heating, and they were all eating beans and rice and things like this. That's the other downside, is that if your statistics are not up for the week, and the organisation hasn't made their target in terms of how much money they're supposed to make for the week, you are all downgraded really to eat beans and rice for the week. So you eat soybeans and rice and nothing else. And that happened a lot. And also you wouldn't get paid. And if you did get paid, I mean, we're talking about 50p.
Yeah.
You know, it was
you can't
just,
do anything with it, can
no,
you? Yeah.
That's right. So I got back to England, was enrolled in normal school. Now, I had no schooling on the ship at all, so I hadn't been educated at all while I was on there. I even started to, because you're an adult in a child's body, it's okay to smoke, but I was only allowed to smoke below decks, because if I smoked above decks, it was bad PR for the organisation, so I wasn't allowed to.
But your mannerisms and your personality must have shifted towards more of a practical adult essence as well.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You're going to go to a school with children. You're more like the adults.
Yeah.
You probably get on more with, the teachers than you
I
would
did.
with...
Yeah, it's a really good insight. Absolutely 100% true. Very true. I remember when we even went away one weekend on a school trip, and I sat in front with the teachers.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. I had no time for kids.
Yeah, because you've got no connection with children,
that's right.
You're around adults, and they're forced you into this way of
That's
living.
right.
And then you have to step up, you have to get older,
Yeah.
because it's survival.
Yeah. And it was very common too for people who were young, teenagers, to have relationships with older people. So I was 14, my boyfriend was in his 20s.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's, that was common.
Well, it was common back then as well. It was even common when I was at school.
Yeah.
The older girls would always have a boyfriend who used to pick them up in a car outside the school.
Yeah.
And it was just a normal thing. You could never date somebody in the same year as
That's
you.
right,
So, yeah.
And parents even just turned a blind eye to it,
Because it was a normal thing, probably because they went through it as well. So, yeah.
So I was smoking as well. So anyway, I got back and joined, it must have been the first year of senior school, given that I missed out on that last year of junior school. And I started at a comprehensive in East Grinstead. And it gave me stability that I actually quite enjoyed school. And I got on really well with the teachers.
Did it feel like a weight off your shoulders?
Yeah, it was. I then had routine, and I could see a way out through education to perhaps possibilities of a life outside of the organisation.
So where were you living at this time?
So still living in this manor house.
So you were back with Mum.
Yeah.
And your little brother.
But she didn't meet me at the airport or anything.
Really?
No, she's working.
So you had some chaperone just pick you up and
Yes.
kind of take
Yeah,
you.
yeah. You did. Well, every day they have a courier taking the post and coming back,
Courier.
so the couriers. Yeah.
So you've been couriered.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was couriered. Yeah.
You're like a package, you know. You
100%.
like products, really. That's what you like.
That's
a product.
exactly it.
My
Yeah.
word. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So
So I'm brought back.
So schools are kind of, this is this stability. So you're at senior school now, stability in life. It must have felt like, you know, the backpack's off, there's a weight off your shoulders. Did you confide in any of the teachers? Was there any of that?
No.
You didn't tell anybody
Didn't
about
tell
this?
a soul. You're not allowed to.
So the
No,
secrecy
it's
thing
called
kinda,
natter and backchat,
Right,
and no, you're
okay.
not allowed to.
Yeah.
No, you get into big trouble if you say anything.
And you'll probably manipulate and lie and do anything you can for people not to know about that as well. So you probably get
Yeah.
really good at lying as well.
Yeah, and anything you do, anything you can to stay with your mother. You know, I wasn't going to be sent away anywhere again. No, I did not want that to happen again.
Yeah.
So I'm conforming.
Okay.
And after school each day, rather than homework, we had to work. So I would be the receptionist on the desk on reception till 6 each day.
Yeah.
Then we go home in the evenings and we have to do our homework if we did it. But then those night times then became get back on the bus after dinner and get back to work at St. Hills. So we would do stuff like stuffing evenings where you putting letters in envelopes. And that was actually quite fun because we'd have music. I think people probably brought pizzas in and stuff like that. It was quite a camaraderie and everybody together, and we'd all got one
communal.
common. Yeah, so
Because if you're all doing the same thing, it's
so
not
I
as
didn't
bad as
mind
it-
that. Yeah. But one thing did happen, which is really telling, and I didn't realize at the time. I developed a psychological condition where you can't swallow. So I would always be the last person in the school hall who would, because I had a terror of choking. I was terrified that I was choke. And I didn't realize that, of course this happened. Of course this happened. The psychological abuse and the physical abuse I'd gone through, I lost my voice. And I think it was just, I couldn't swallow. You know, so every thing I took down was, I would be terrified that I'd die, that I couldn't breathe. And it's, you know, horrendous.
Do you know what that is? Do you know the
No.
reasons why of the swallow? Because
No, but if I was to talk to a psychologist, I bet you they know about it. It just...
Yeah, because I'm thinking, so, I mean, obviously certain traumas, the problems you have around that are not necessarily linked. It's not necessarily tied to it. So it's not being able to swallow doesn't make any sense. But to you, it makes sense. So there's a fear thing. There's an instinct which your body
and also if you think about it, unless some other people might have become anorexic, for example, you know, and not eaten at all. So it's that's definitely something. I haven't really investigated it further, but that happened.
But yeah, I mean, it could well just be a fear thing and an instinctual thing from you, but it must be harder from you as well. You know, you kind of now you're in a normal life and now you can't swallow.
Yeah, and actually, even today, there's still a slight legacy of if you started choking on something, I'd panic, and I'd rush to you to try and help you, and I. To counteract that and to help myself, I did a St. John's ambulance course so I could learn. And I did actually save someone's life once.
That's great.
And that helped me enormously.
It's facing your fears, isn't it, really, in a way?
Yeah, and So that helped me.
Okay.
So I'm working away at the Scientology, and I got to my A-levels. And by this time, at age 14, I'd been dating this guy in his 20s and was raped by him.
Really?
And I didn't tell a soul. And he eventually, I split up from him, and he left and married somebody, and his wife at the time found out what he'd done. And when she was flying back to England, she told the ethics officer in Scientology that what he'd done, although it had happened to me, and my mother then found out. But I got hauled into the ethics office and told it was my fault and I'd pulled it in. And I was not allowed to report it to law enforcement.
So you got the blame?
I was not allowed to tell anybody.
Because they want to keep this hush-hush?
Yeah, everything, you're not allowed to go to law enforcement when you're in the Sea Org.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to.
So consequences, do they deal with consequences inside or not?
Yeah, so you're then given what they call a condition. So I was given the condition of liability because I was a liability to the organisation for having been raped. And then I had to ask, you have to do steps where you go and ask the crew to be allowed back into the fold, if you like.
So what about him then?
Nothing. Nothing.
It's his fault, it's not your fault.
Nothing. Nothing.
So you got punished for something
I
he
pulled
did.
it in. Yeah. Yeah. Anything that happens like that, it's you pull it in. You made it happen. You brought it about.
And again, you have to take it and you have to just brush it under the carpet of the many things you've had to brush under
And
the
you
carpet.
believe it. You believe you pulled it in.
Right.
You believe that that's how it's designed to
Yeah. So you felt a lot of
brainwash
well,
you.
it is my fault.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. What did I do to pull this in?
Hmm.
Yeah. So that happened when I was 14. Later on, and this is really personal, but later on, I married a guy when I was 18 and couldn't have intercourse with him because my vaginal muscles had seized up. And it's a condition I didn't know, and it's called vaginismus. And as soon as I left Scientology, hey, no problem. But
Right.
when I was there, and so of course he's getting really frustrated, he sent me to see a doctor to see if there's anything wrong. And I went to see a normal doctor. In these days you go to a Scientology doctor, but went to see a normal GP, and it was this man, I'm not joking, he had a monocle and a bow tie, and he examined me and he said, "Oh my dear," he said, "there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, that a good stiff glass of red wine wouldn't hurt." And he said, "There's nothing wrong." So I didn't realize that it was a psychological thing until years later when I was reading about it in a waiting room at a dentist surgery or something.
Well, you've mentioned this, the not being able to swallow, and then this as well.
And this
is
as well.
your
It's all
body
connected,
reacting.
isn't it?
It's
Yeah.
completely connected.
It's connected, yeah.
It's
And the
there's
abuse that I'd suffered at the hands of my stepbrothers as well.
Yeah.
So it's boom, 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 you know. Oh, my goodness.
I mean,
Yeah. And
are
so
you're just dealing with this at this time, Danielle. Are you just kind of, is there any, are you crying at night? Are you sort of suicidal? Is there any, what are you
crying
thinking?
wasn't a thing that happened, no. It was dry as anything.
So you've just been built to be chiseled away like a hardened rock, really.
Absolutely. And I became kind of one of their little Hitlers, to be honest, because I was then sent to America to do training. Well, first of all, they yanked me out of school while I was doing my A-levels.
Really?
And I wanted to finish and they wouldn't let me. So they pulled me out to do work for them, working again. Then they decided to send me to what they call their flag land base in Clearwater in Florida to do training for their organization executive course and their flag executive briefing course to become an officer and to go back and to make the organization boom, you know. Did that for a year in Clearwater. I actually quite enjoyed being in Clearwater because being a student, you knew what time you were getting up, you knew you were having a meal and breaks, you knew what, and you had to go to bed on time, and you had to, you know, so you were treated, and the food was good. Whereas in England, the food had been crap, beans and rice and what have you, but we had quite nice food in Florida.
And also, if you're feeling like I'm going to Clearwater now, this might be a better place than where I am now as well. You're always kind of trying to seek,
And it
you're always
was.
taking the opportunity.
Yeah,
to,
even though we lived in a motel that they owned or rented, it was still better than what I'd had before, you know. Yeah, so I was sent back to England after doing the course. As soon as I got back to England, they wanted to send me back to America again, literally, to go and do more exec training and work it. I think in the Commodore's Messenger organ in America. But the authorities in the customs people said, no, you've only just done training, why are you coming back again? They sent me back to England. So I came back to England and wasn't allowed to go and do the training. And that was a good thing. But then what happened, so I'd become a real little executive now. I really, had all of this.
Yeah,
I'm the big cheese, I've come back and I've become what they call an LRH communicator, an LRH com. It's like, you're given instructions on what to do on his behalf in England, and you report the stats and all this sort of stuff. And my sister said, because my sister had never really wanted to be involved at all, and she said, I'd become like a robot. because I was saying to her, because she wasn't well and she had a migraine, so I was going, get out of bed, get yourself sorted. You know, it was like, psh, psh, psh. I was doing exactly, I was a good little Scientologist.
Yeah, because they've turned you into what they wanted you to be.
I was completely absolute robot. And I had lost the power of thought, lost the power of any kind of freedom of mind, freedom of spirit. It was dead. It had gone completely.
And how old were you now?
20, 21.
So you've been in since 6 years old.
6 years old.
And at 20.
Yeah.
Been through all of this.
Yeah. And then what happened is my mother had a stroke and she was 42 years old. And in the run up to the stroke, she'd been working for them till 3 a.m. for 3 weeks in a row with hardly any sleep. And her husband had left her, her third husband had left her. And she'd had this stroke. My younger brother was 8 by this stage. And my sister had gone. My sister had left with her husband. My younger brother was out, another brother, and then this young one had gone with my mother. So it was just me left. And I thought, I can't stay here without my family. So obviously my family meant something to me, despite my mother having allowed things to happen that happened. I decided I couldn't stay. And by this stage, I'd already hit the rehabilitation project force again in England. And I thought, I'm leaving. And I left, and luckily my sister had a home, had a house, and then I never looked back after that. And then I was able to swallow, I was able to eat, I was able to have sex, I was able to be free, I was able to, but it took a long time. It took a long, long time.
So was it easy to leave? How did you leave?
So in
I've heard
Scientology,
a lot of stories that really, it's tough to leave.
it's
isn't it?
harder to leave now than it
Yeah.
used to be.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's much harder now than it used to be.
Right, so you could just walk out.
Well, yes, I mean, you could, although they would still try and get you back. But what happened was, to give myself some grace, time-wise, in Scientology, they have something called a CSW, which is called a completed staff work. So you have to say what the situation is, and you have to say what it is you want to do and what the solution to that is. And so in Scientology, if you've got any credit card debts or anything like that, and it could bring the organization into disrepute in any way, then you can put in the CSW and ask for some time off to go and do some moonlighting outside of the organization to pay off your credit card debts. So I pretended I had a credit card debt. I didn't have a credit card debt, but I pretended that I did.
Yeah, you found a way, haven't you?
Yeah. I think I owed the guy that I married when I was 18, I think I owed him some money for a pair of jeans or something, but apart from that. And so I put in this CSW and said I wanted to leave to go moonlighting. And they said, okay. So I had a few weeks grace. I don't know if it was 3 or 6 weeks. Anyway, when the time was up, knock, knock, knock on my sister's door, the phone would ring, and in the end they got the message, no, she doesn't want to speak to you. No, she doesn't want to come out. And then in the meantime, a friend of mine had got me a job in London. And that was it. And the one thing Scientology did give me was you can wing anything you want. So I was able to get good jobs in London by being good at the jobs because I knew about solid work. I knew what it meant. I put in the hard graft. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you can figure things out, you can manipulate, you can kind of but you understand people more. You probably
Good with
understand
people, yeah.
very good with people, but
Yeah.
also understand the human psyche and the human
Exactly.
psychology. So
Yeah.
because you've been through all of this.
Yeah.
And what's the worst that can happen? You
Yeah.
do all the work, of course I'll do all
Yeah.
the work, give it to us.
Absolutely. And that's also why I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. If someone comes running and say, oh, my lipstick's off, or I've lost an eyelash, or I've broken a nail, fuck off. Seriously? Seriously, what matters in life, really?
But they haven't been through
But
that.
they haven't been through it. So I have to give them grace. I have to let that go. And, it works both ways. And it's like...
But the thing is, that's the hard thing, because the worst thing that's happened to you is the worst thing that's happened to you,
Well, the worst that could have been death, and that has happened to some people in Scientology.
So people who've died or committed
people who've
suicide?
killed themselves.
Really?
Yeah.
It's the only way out, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you were so resilient
that
you kept battling on
I
because you knew there was a
definitely
way out.
have got this and that's why, you know, it took me years to cry about all of this. And it's only in the last 10 years, maybe 5 years actually, that I've cried more than I've ever cried about it. And it's because I've got a lovely friend who's a counselor. She's never been a Scientologist, but she understands what went on and coercion and control. And it's very interesting. I don't know who it is, and I wish I knew who it was. There is a psychologist in America who has said, who deals with cult survivors, who has said that of all the cults that they've dealt with, if someone's been in Scientology, it takes them 4 times as long to counsel them as it would a normal person who'd been in another cult.
Why do you think that is?
In total indoctrination and brainwashing embedded in your psyche. Because not only is Scientology, you know, a lot of religions, you read the Bible, you talk about God and redemption and salvation and, you know, whereas in Scientology, they go through processes where they get into your mind, you know, in depth, embedded in your psyche in terms of the processes that they run on you, which could be argued to be like psychology.
Yeah.
You know, it's designed that way.
Well, it is, because it's all about trust. And if you've been in since the age of 6, you don't know anything else. So therefore you trust these people. So this must be the right way. So therefore it's hard to leave.
And also, you know, if you're told all the time, we're winning, we're clearing the planet, you know, we've got millions and millions of supporters. They don't actually. And they are told today still that they've got all millions and millions of subscribers to Scientology. They don't. They don't. I think at the most I understand about 30,000 or something.
So what is it that you want to get across regarding Scientology?
The reason I'm talking about it is that anybody's child could have been me today. So if somebody is asked to come and do what they call a personality test off the streets, Tottenham Court Road in London, back in my day, it's now in central London, no, in the city. In England, there's one in Brighton. They want to open up one in Gateshead. They've got a building. There's one in Sunderland. If they ask you to come in and do a test, this is the beginning of the long, slippery slope. They'll sell you a book. The book will probably interest you. The book will say, right, this is interesting. I'll find out more. And then you go and sign up for something. You maybe do their communication course. And some of these things make you feel good. They do make you feel good because they work. They do work. But he's plagiarized a lot of this from other people. He wasn't a trained psychologist. He's, you know, or a philosopher.
He's a fiction writer.
But, you know, decided to create a religion and make money, you know.
Well, a religion?
Yeah, exactly.
Quotation marks?
Yeah.
It's
well, in America, they've got tax-free status.
Yeah, that's
under the auspices of being a religion.
Yeah.
But in England, they haven't been given that.
Yeah.
Because they have to be shown to be, that they, what's the wording? Whatever it is, it's conducive to the public good.
But there's such bad press. Anyone mentions Scientology, it's like, oh, it's this cult. Everyone thinks about that, who just normal folk like myself walking around going, ooh, Scientology. It's got a bad rep, you know.
But they're still recruiting people. The sad thing is they're now recruiting what I believe are the more vulnerable. So in Africa, for example, there's a South African journalist, I think her name's Annika, I've got her name. She went into what they call Kalami, which is a castle out near where the racetrack is outside Johannesburg. And all these African children who were taken out of villages have been recruited into Scientology. And she was asking the kids, you know, with the microphone, how are you doing? And one of the children said that they were asked how they got in. And she said, because you told my mother, because they told my mother they would take my spirit away if I didn't come. So they are then feeding into the cultural and spiritual kind of, you know.
So you're manipulating through a culture
Yeah.
and what they believe in as well.
It's really sad and it's scary. And also that in Manila and places like that.
Yeah. So, Danielle, one final message. I think this should be more of a personal thing about resilience to anybody out there who is going through the similar thing or have suffered the similar issues that you've suffered. Please, just whatever you want to say as a final message.
I want to say no before you go. Do your research. I have no problem with anybody wanting to believe, that an ant is God, for heaven's sake, whatever. But do your research and know what you're getting involved in, and do not get involved in coercion, because these guys will brainwash you, and before you know it, they'll have you and you won't be able to get out of there. And it's abuse, and it has to stop.
Are you in a good place now? Are you happy now?
I'm really in a really good place. And the fact that I'm even speaking out now just shows that I'm feeling strong and good about it. I've gone through quite a lot of counselling myself, and there is hope. I want to actually speak to the people who are in there now. We are here to help you. And if you contact the Aftermath Foundation, they can help get you out. I never had that when I wasn't around. And the Aftermath Foundation can help pay to get you out and to have you put in a safe place. I didn't have that.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.